coming back to the exclusion of billionaires in a cabinet, I said it's a ipso facto reality that they're not into reciprocity. I do think that that principle holds up. And the problem is yeah, these are worldly powerful people, so they're taking their like one-way street line of power accumulation to the usurpation of political office, because that's the big game for them. You do that, all of your businesses are secure. You're the system that works for you. But see, this is what the fundamental understanding that they don't understand is that the system is built for everyone. So politicians, getting back to the concept of, we know what bad politicians are. Getting back to the concept of a good politician, he's the conduit of resources so that they are dispersed in such a way that leads to greater prosperity, or at least assured prosperity, or deterrence versus people that want to take what you have, even if it's a pile of rocks. If they think they can take it, they've got 2 frigates and you've got a rowboat, why won't they just show up and blast you if they feel like it? The view looks nice on your side and it's free. Cost a couple of shells, that's it. And you coming to tell them about the new coming of your idea of globalism doesn't interest them in the least. They're on a military type of way of thinking. You're not strong enough, they will defeat you. And why should they listen to someone they can defeat? This is just so basic. And yet, again, when you get into idealism, you get into civilizational theory, you get into neo-Leninist fog machines, and you get distracted from the basics. To the point that you're a liability, not just to yourself, but to everyone else that you mislead. The misled, misleading others. If you think of that as puppetry and a program type of thing. So that's why people that weren't qualified for the job didn't get the job. Because unqualified people will cause the conditions, the preconditions for defeat before you're defeated. So that's why there's exclusionary practices as far as picking the suitable candidates for reciprocal or reciprocating systems that really do need to function to work. If you need even a more basic example, think of like a sprinkler head that has you plug that into the spout, and then all of a sudden you have like 5 different spouts you can plug into. And then that when the water goes on, it goes through 5 different hoses to 5 different places. You see how that can lead to a multiplication of productivity, where all of a sudden this vast area gets irrigated in a rather easy and efficient way, the way it was built to be easy and efficient, to do just that. But if you don't have that, you have somebody who's siphoning off the water for their own private use, then they have bumper crops every year. It's no problem, but there's a desertification that takes place in the wider region. And so, yeah, the misapplication of political office, as we've seen in these times of banditry, they have devastating macroeconomic, macro-socio-political effects. For example, if Georgia wasn't vassalized, or Armenia, and Armenia was a functioning society, and Georgia too, because their political systems weren't rigged, then would a militaristic Turkish state decide to reclaim willy-nilly a piece of historical territory that has been populated by a certain European ethnic group like the Armenians for thousands of years. That's also culturally significant. It's not about dirt or minerals, it's about cultural preservation. But because the legalistic global community signed off on a dashed line that didn't make any sense, they can do that legally. And nobody's going to question it, right? It's just those Armenians, they had something, they just didn't get the right memo, but they did get a bunch of bombs and starvation. So that finally brought home the message, I guess. So, and I guess, again, because those are distant vassals, they don't get first class service by their big brother who's trying to take a meat cleaver to Eastern Europe. So, bad times, I guess, right? But that's the thing. See, these wealthy people that do it via their methods, they lead to a shrinking of prosperity. And of course they have rationalizations that it's not as bad as everyone thinks, and what is it? It's just a billion here, a billion there, a trillion here, a trillion. At the end of the day, nobody's starving, right? They have these comparisons. Look at the Africans. Look at how well things were running under Bongo, and wasn't that civilized until it all fell apart. And we're not going to be around here forever, but while we're here, we really do like when the money flows to us, even though we would grant you the theory, right? We would grant you the theory that what you're saying is correct. We're just not going to apply it to ourselves in our instance, because it's a big world out there, and if we don't take it, somebody else will, So can't we kick this franchise down the road another 10 years? I mean, we're not going to live forever. So it would be real shame if after all of this nonsense and all of this disappointment that some form of that takes place instead of massive reforms. But, as an optimist, why not? I mean, if you can choose to, why not choose optimism instead? I mean, not naive optimism, certainly not putting up with sadists and masochists in a political realm where they have no business being and are easily identifiable, especially the lack of their results. But, regulating the regulations of the regulations, that's not a business model that any country ever needed, and certainly not now. So I do believe, and they know it, that 99% of their schemes are really disposable, especially their litigation. But we shall see. Not just because people are wrong does not mean they don't prevail. As far as I know, Armenians are packing just whatever they can carry on their backs and are hiking out of a war zone that's been signed off by the UN and other international players that are big into boundaries and deals and backroom negotiations and deliveries and all those different types of things. I mean, apparently oil brings you some aces in your deck to sweeten the pot. You can almost hit blackjack every time if you play, but when other people play, they lose, with the regularity that the rule book says. So, but yeah, people should not be surprised by impunity. Vulgar people that think they have impunity act with impunity. That's the rule. So it does not behoove the civilized person or the civilized West to be so debilitated by charlatanism that they cannot fight effectively or deter effectively. I like deter. Deterrence means peace. And even the better part, if they do start something, they get thumped, taken out permanently. So if someone is that crazy, and look, there's criminals all the time doing that. You're standing in the line at McDonald's and some sucker comes out of nowhere and hits you in the face for no reason. But before he does, you duck, and then you hit him in a place that, let's say, stops his nefarious rampage dead cold. Problem solved. So that's the other side of deterrence. It's not just a show. It's not here. Let my eyebrows get plucked for 77,000 pounds, like Patel. It's do this. This will happen. Like, it's not just a threat. It's for real. But you see, I'm not a state actor. These are state actors that need to figure these principles out. But a lot of people seem to have forgotten that in these really wonky times that we live in. And they are wonky. It doesn't matter how far they want to push their info bubbles to make people think this is the new Overton norm, but it's not. It's just, this is how you fail, and this is what they want you to do, is fail. And if you do it, you will fail. But people aren't doing it. So, why are we so unpopular? Well, maybe that unpopularity will turn into finally some unpopular things getting canceled for a change. How about that? Instead of popular things? Like, instead of Chris Farley getting canceled as a comedian if he were still alive, some schmuck that can't tell a joke and has problem glasses and likes to berate the audience, that act gets canceled instead. Then the whole time slot opens up for more talent like Chris Farley. And the crowd is rolling like every night. They're leaving the establishment with wet trunks, men and women. And it's not just the beer, they're crying their eyes out. Everything's running. They said it was the best spent money they ever spent. They'd come back. If the place is open, they're going to be back. They're going to be asking for seats in the front. Or maybe they want the back because they know they can't control themselves in public. And I like using comparisons like that. A great comedy club has great management. It also has great taste. It also has a great open atmosphere of which encourages talent and discourages bullies and dupes. Has a culture of excellence. And it might not be understood from the outside. It's not necessarily something you can turn into a franchise. Because that's this, materialistic way. These billionaires say, let me just copy this idea, copy and paste, and then it's the same thing. No, that's substitutionism. That's producing products in China instead of the UK and the US or Australia. I love authentic products that have an authentic production behind them and have behind that the authentic values and the authentic tradition. Why? Because they're not fakes. They're the real thing. Their products are the real thing. The way they make the products is the real thing. It's not about the money. But why don't they understand that? Because they're digitists. They're digiting the digitry. But fine, this is not to point fingers at these people. It's just they don't belong in certain places, and politics is one of them. Culture is another. They want to do their thing, at night in front of a monitor and do trading and stuff, they can do that. There's a subculture for that. It's just not in the public space. Also, regulators regulating regulations. Any of those people with that background, just for God's sakes, go. I don't know what else you're going to do. You're not really qualified for anything except slowing things down and messing things up. But, of the thousands that now inhabit the civil service, maybe we can keep, the best 10 of them. Put the rest, I don't know. Riveting steel beams in new settlement facilities or something like that to solve the housing crisis definitively and resoundingly. How about this, with rent-free accommodation, something like that? And I do want to come back to all the guys who actually fight wars, who are fighting wars right now for our freedoms, like real freedoms, European, transatlantic security and values. Look, every one of those guys immediately qualifies for a GI Bill equivalent. And not only that, they get dibs on choice housing. You gotta take care of these guys medically. And these are promises that shouldn't be made for cynical reasons. It's the right thing to do. So you need to start thinking about comprehensive programs for these guys, including remuneration. Not one single one of them should be considered so poor that they're starving or in some other material condition that is in any way shameful. Now that doesn't mean, gold toilets, okay? But it does mean, absolutely does mean the basics. Because they absolutely do deserve it. And we absolutely can afford it. Regarding the concept and methods of lawfare, this is a field of study that should be looked into more closely. It's just a horrifying weapon against civilian populations. Horrifying. It more or less takes an institution which was supposed to protect the citizenry from predation and predates on them instead. So it's an inversion of its original purpose. And there's different factors at work. You have to realize that wherever you have unscrupulous human beings that can abuse their power, there's the chance that you will have people that will abuse that power for advantages. And then it's also not so easy to police. And if they come up, if a interested group of people come up with a new legislation and get it passed just once, then again their interpretation of that then has a legal basis. So in other words, they legalize illicit practices within the sphere of legality or the legal framework. So it was also funny. I mean, these are, when we talk about blobs, mandarins and bureaucratic blobs and how all of these things end up developing. It's a confluence of those factors. It's multiple factors. And of course, human psychology. The darker aspects of it. And of course, not to forget, we're no longer dealing with just national systems. We're dealing with competing geopolitical actors. so that have a vested interest in making systems break on our open and free side. See, they open and free for them means a green light for hybrid attacks. See, in their authoritarian, totalitarian states, they don't tolerate nothing. So if they see a competitor that would tolerate, for example, fake groups, brainwash people, attacking normal people, then they're going to be like, wow, how much do we have to pay for that? What NGO do we have to snap our fingers and bring into existence for that to happen? Oh, what, we could do 100? We're unlimitless? They're going to back that, and they have backed that. And they back legislation, right? Lobbying groups, they back them. So how can we make the work environment more toxic than it is? Let's come up with that plan and then have a lobby group do a full-on press to get that legislation added. So we're talking now, again, if we go to the historical precedents or the historical roots of this, let's just say it started in 1919 with the international. I mean, it started officially with organized state actors, state terrorists, and fifth columnists and all that, starting in 1990. So we have a lot of decades where this was going on, but undeclared. You know, maybe there were a few busts here and there, but not all of it was stopped. A lot of it did get put into law. Now, when you start understanding terrorism on the level of social engineering, which is what the KGB was, that they would have, let's say, an alternative, let's say not, they wanted to keep things together in their totalitarian system, but they wanted their competitors to fall apart. So they used inverted stability principles, social stability principles, and then injected them where they could in competing entities such as Western countries, Western Europe, UK, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and of course the United States as number one. So, but again, if you're if your media has been rubified, you're just gonna say, "Oh well, I guess everyone's working for the common good here, like just like me." It's surely, if they put it into legislation, a bunch of cronies backed by state terrorists, surely that, on the face of it, must have been for idealistic reasons. And then just imagine that they coordinate public relations campaigns, again, to sell anything. Well, I keep coming back to used car salesman, but just imagine it's a used car that's really crap. It's a lemon. A lemon sells people. So how do you sell a lemon? Well, that's their job. They take that up. Just like how do you get a criminal off or get a criminal off his sentence, or to beat a rap. That the same type of process. How do I make a bad thing happen? How do I sell a bad thing? The people that do that don't believe in God or divine retribution, because they're really modern wise guys and girls types of people, because they take the money to do something difficult, sell a lemon. They exist. That's basically their business. People don't pay people to sell things if they sell themselves. So that was a defect for hire public relations companies in the United States. Oddly enough, 1919, that's sort of when that happened. Like ex-army guys and propagandists that were into I guess you wouldn't say misuse, but certainly using the manipulative organs of mass media to get a narrative across, like victory or death, that they had to find a job, spelled JWOB, job, after they were kicked out of their military careers, or got kicked out of the military contracts, or maybe they only retained a couple of those. But they figured they could open it up for business. Well, of course, maybe their assumptions were that they were going to help domestic American businesses become better known, or this or that. But it certainly soon developed into something else. And it was probably abuse from the beginning. There's certain cases, if you read the book, was it Engineering Consent? That's a famous one by Bernays. You know, the Rockefellers had a mine in Colorado where they killed striking workers and stuff, and so they had to salvage their reputation somehow, and so they started paying these people to make them the Elon Musks of their time. Even today, there's a generally good impression that they have. It's a generally good, favorable impression. Oh yeah, they were successful business people. They weren't associated with a mass murder in a mining camp that they ran, and didn't have to treat the workers the way they did because they're filthy, stinking rich type people. No, that's not them. These are philanthropists. Now, on the other hand, look, if you get to, let's say, I won't say Buddhist values, but at least Christian values, there's the possibility of redemption in life. In a way, it's true. You might be able to make up for those mistakes by changing your behavior. And instead of being greedy, predacious, worldly people, you could shift to generous and well-meaning people. But whether or not that transformation takes place and whether or not it's just public relations is really up to you to decide. Do their actions speak louder than the words that they pay for? Yes or no? Does a donkey change its stripes? Someone who is hell-bent on greed, do they turn around like in Charles Dickens? Is it a Christmas, or is it a Carol, or what? A Christmas Tale? Does that happen more often than not? Who knows? I like to think it happens a lot more than one would think if one was just a cynical, worldly person that doesn't allow that possibility, that discounts it. Why do that? Keep the door open. But on the other hand, misused by geopolitical actors for the purpose of causing a lot of problems. So people with an intent on drafting, producing, and pushing not just bad narratives, but bad policies. So the lawfare, our legal system is now littered with this crap. Just littered with it. Now here's the other thing. You have to think that these lawyers also that were writing this stuff, like legislators, think of that, the lawmakers. Lawmakers. Do we need more laws? Do we need lawmakers? Like, answer that question. Most people would say no. But because perhaps they get into some type of billing regime where they're billing the government or some other party that has a lot of money to produce just endless amounts of legislation, and they because they have to produce crap in the form of new laws, because they're lawmakers, because that's what they bill for, then they almost feel guilty that of course they have to produce the toxic, ridiculous needless crap, because otherwise they couldn't build the government, the American people, for their services that they don't need. So this is another reason why there's just been an accumulation of legalism. It's unbelievable. I mean, if you looked at the laws that the founding fathers started off with, this wasn't as much as what you have now. It's probably 1% of what we have now. Now, okay, obviously some legislation is useful. Some legislation they could not have foreseen, and that's exactly the type of legislation that is usually the right thing. Is, hey, we have a problem, we need to legislate it, but not we need to legislate every problem, because then you funnel every problem again through these courts, and these mandarins usurp a lot of power and burn up a lot of time and money. But they don't see it that way, because that's their business model. It's a racket, or it becomes one over time. So it was funny that there's some English commentators discussing things like all of these toxic, now neo-Leninist hybrid operations within their civil services. They got like 500,000 of these birds. They don't have any production to speak of in useful, like, new technology, but they have 500,000 civil servants, uncivil servants, just burning up the budget and regulating the regulations. And not too well. Oh, and running around with neo-Leninist campaigns, because that's the main thing that they do, is conform to new, provenly toxic and defunct ideologies. But he said, yeah, when they were managing the Raj, or what was India, it's like hundreds of millions of people. They only had 12,000 civil servants for that. But in the UK today, 500,000 of these people. I mean, do they make stamps by hand? I mean, are they making the postage stamps by hand? Is it like a little elf factory on the North Pole, where one piece of paper, one petition is passed around the room? They have some type of weird way of doing things. These people collecting a paycheck for the crap that they produce. Yeah, that's the blob, man. That's the Mandarinism we're talking about. These people are just completely disconnected from doing something productive or meaningful in this lifetime. It's just one long grift, one long ride at taxpayer expense. So that, again, they become like a bulwark or a wall for meaningful change. They're the outer defenses of financial tyrants. So obviously that wasn't what government was conceived to be. It's a mutation that does not need to be accepted as inevitable. Again, this happened. It can be changed. A stroke of a pen, everything's done. These people, they're all fired. Also, looking to lawyers that are dunning the government for hours for producing the legislation that just makes life more difficult and involves them more in some type of racket. No, we don't need them. They're all fired. Every last one of them. In fact, maybe some of them will have to pay some money back. Like, well, look, just have a computer print out who got how much and why. Imagine it's like a law firm. It's like 50 billion pounds or something. That's somebody whose assets could be seized, right there. What is this for again? Oh, you were legislating the legislation, and what peer reviewing legislation that is just a big ball of nothing. You, we're gonna reassess. How about this? We're not gonna confiscate anything. We're just gonna reassess what their value, the value of their contribution, which is not really all that quantifiable, and then say, well, based on the amount of time you put in, you got 50 billion, but we should have only paid like, I don't know, 500,000. So the rest you need to pay back. Something like that. And you go down the list, 50 billion for this, 40 billion for this. What was the result of this again? What did we get? What did the country get out of it? Oh, nothing? Okay, they need to pay that back. Something like that could happen. But of course, these people, if that's their business model, they're dead set against anything affecting lawfare. Dead set against it. They're lawfareists. So if they can make you look like the bad guy and not them, when they're the bad guy, that they're going to do that. They have to. They're committed to a bad position. They're more or less, you should consider them a fifth column. They certainly are. It's a big part of it. It's not just in the information sphere. Everyone thinks fifth columnists are in the information sphere, which is true, but they're also in the legal fields. Humanities, psychologists, and on down the line, non-traditional attack vectors. Which brings me back to, okay, well, what would a government look like if it doesn't have this culture of lawmaking? Well, that means a bunch of people that are on call for certain problems, but not like every day. Maybe it's, once every 2 weeks or once a month. There's a review. What are the important issues of this month? And then what do we need to do something, or do we not need to do something? Staying abreast of issues. And if there is a need to do something, a proposal should be made and then it should be done. But nothing more than that. Not eternal legislation, not eternal lawmaking, no. You only make a law if you need to. If you don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And these interested parties and lobbying groups that want laws to be made for some reason, if they come out one time with a bad proposal, all of them should be disbanded and discredited. They should not have access to lawmaking or lawmakers. If they continue to do that, you should consider them a malignant political force, which is not about bringing the country to a better place, but to a worse place. Because it's a method. It's a vector of attack. And certainly in these modern times, it's been used to horrifying effect, crippling effect. Looking at specifically at the United States, but the UK is horrifying as well. Just crippled in the extreme. So no, it's not about lawmaking. Hell no, it's not. That's not what government's about at all. Most of it, again, thinking about government in a positive way, is redistribution of collective resources to places that society as a whole would benefit if there were more resources devoted to those areas. Now, of course, that's not happening in our time. That's just getting diverted into pockets or paying off interest to loans. That, again, it's a racket. So, and just with the greedy demons, right? The greedy demons, like vampires, what happens when you get greedy demons that usurp political processes? Everything gets the life sucked out of it. Things become decrepit. Things don't work. You needed 5 people, they only got 1. And the one person isn't qualified because it's a political appointment type thing, because somebody wanted to cut even on that. Does it happen? Has it happened? Of course it has. All of Russia outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, that's the net effect of greedy demons. But again, a race to the bottom is sort of what they've agreed on. Well, we're plummeting. Well, we're going to make you plummet faster. So we know what doesn't work, and now we're going to make it not work in your on your side of the world. Now, if we get a little bit past lawfare into just straight up criminal activities, just think about them placing people or boosting certain people that work with them. So those people are really motivated because they're just there to take. They have no connection to the population that they are criminalizing. None. So if they can take over another neighborhood by any means necessary, and let's say that the other guys pay off some people so that nothing happens, they love that. They love being given a green light to predate. Oh yes, new territory. Oh, who's there? Oh, a couple of professors, engineers, who you name it. Who cares? Let's rob their barbecue next tomorrow night. Let's break their car window. Let's burn their house down. This is going to be great. And so they progress through entire cities, ruling them. And yet the wrecking crew, this is their business. That this is what they've been boosted up to do. Oh, you know what company you need to take over? Take over the newspaper, because we got to benefit from doing that, like not covering the important things and focusing on unimportant things. But let's not make it official, of course. This is going to be it's going to have all the appearances of legality. It's just, certain people from the humanities would notice the difference, but the general public mostly doesn't. It's always like an 80-20 split. 80% of the people just are along for the ride. The 20% of talented or ethical people get the shaft or are alienated. But it's just business. They got boosted by some what some type of again Eurasian Connie crime syndicate. Why not? That look how the dice rolled for them this time around. They get the perks, everyone else gets the shaft, but they don't care. What would they have been doing otherwise? What do you think this life would have offered people like that if they didn't decide to go into crime? So, but again, to take the higher view, it's not about their personalities. It's about just identifying, like areas that have been completely trashed. You need to put together 2 and 2. Who's here, and why? That's like a good question to ask. I think those 2 questions are sort of the first 2 questions. They're really the only 2 questions you need to ask in wrecked areas. I think for scientists and criminologists, it would be better to know the higher levels. But on the lower levels, there's no point in and beating your head up about it. It's the toe that is just a rotten blob. It was devoured by gangrene. You don't need to know more than that before you get it lopped off. If you want to survive without a toe, which, although unfortunate, is sometimes necessary. In fact, it is necessary because tolerating gangrene even on your little toe is potentially a death sentence if it's not treated properly. And it's pretty gruesome. Have you ever seen a bone saw come out? You ever see someone saw through bones of a living person? Pretty gruesome. And yet it can be done skillfully, and it can be done with a lot of medicine, and it can also be done with anesthesia, the proper dose of it, because if you don't dose it properly, your heart will stop. But it can be done professionally, it can be done well, and you can heal and you can recover. But if it isn't, if one link in that chain is not there, you could die too. People die all the time from gangrene. All the time. Even despite having the best medicine. But guess what? A lot of people don't have the best medicine. And why do we have the best medicine? Because we have systems that work versus systems that don't. But if you've got a geopolitical actor that doesn't want your medical system to be working well because it doesn't benefit them long term, then they're going to invest in that happening and not the other way. And if you've given them access and you allow their plausible arguments to prevail without allowing critical feedback, well, you're doomed. Your entire civilization is doomed. So cultural values are important. Oh, yes, they are. And they do need to be maintained. They're not a given. And being a free and open society means having the right security. You have the venue, a great venue. Well, it's only great as long as not just anyone from anywhere can come in and trash it. You have a lax in security. Just imagine, you have a great venue. It's working from Monday to Friday. You're on vacation. Or no, you have the weekend off. But no security, no nothing. They can trash it when you're not there. Come back, have to start from zero. So even on the weekends, there has to be some type of security. Basic security, so it won't get trashed. And the more valuable a thing is, the more people are going to want to either steal it or trash it. You turn around the medical system in your country that poses a counterbalance to other authoritarian regimes, there's going to be a lot of people that don't like you just for doing that. Namely, the enemies of your country and your peoples. And yet, the people who do it are heroes. They should be proud of that their enemies don't like that. Then you know they're good people, don't you? But no, in our time they flip that. The people trying to do good things are the bad people, and the people doing bad things are the good people. See, they like to have those switcheroonies. It's just like whataboutism. Oh yeah, we're bad, but what about you? What about when you did this, right? See, it's cognitive gibberish. Well, it's true, he completely revolutionized the medical establishment, but, he had a first wife who said he was a horrible person. So just don't forget that. That's the most important part. Personalizing, but the personal is political type thing. And you'll find in the subnormal, 20% of the subnormal population, that's it. That's all they needed to hear. He's a bomb. It's not a hero. He's bum. Which is, again, why not all opinions are equal. No, they're not. Your opinion is ridiculous. It's astounding. It's abhorrent. It's misguided. If you want to attach yourself to that, fine. Then how far, how accomplished are you indeed? But to come back to the original point is, do not act if you don't need to act. Do not work if you do not need to work. If you do not need to legislate to something, you should not be in a perpetual state of legislation. You should be more in the monitoring state. What is going on for real? What does this election mean in Mexico, for example? Who are the people there? Do we have a friendly situation, or do we have an invasion? And what measures are appropriate under those circumstances? Like, that type of monitoring is sort of the process that one should be in. And one should not necessarily be over-interpreting events or under-interpreting. But as far as legislation goes, that should only come when it is necessary. Like, for example, putting all of the legislation out of effect, or specific kinds of it with immediate effect, something like that, which means less is more. We're in a time of bloat that requires massive types of deductions, not additions. Or think of it like tumors on a legislative body. They all need to be sliced off. We do not need to be adding more to it. We need to be removing from it based on what has happened in our time leading up to this. And this is, it's weird because it's considered a strange idea, because we're in an accumulationist time. This is a materialist wants to accumulate more. He doesn't want to let things go. But if you've got all this baggage that's causing nothing but havoc, and has turned the courts into rackets that predate on the public, this is exactly the type of thing that needs to be done. But once that's done, you don't need to go back into accumulation mode. You should only act when you need to, but also act when you need to. Like, there should not be hesitation. When it is the right thing to do, you need to act and commit and then follow up. A lot of other things that these weaselly legislators of our time have done. Oh yeah, sure, we're going to sign off on this, for example, new train track. Gets passed off to some cronies, and they just milk the project, and the project does not get done on time. It's way over budget. There's a lot of explanations for why that is. That is not to be tolerated. That cannot be neglected. It's all about the execution as well. In fact, it's more about the execution than it is getting the green light. That type of, once you commit to an act, you need to commit to executing the act. And if any part of that is messed up, or there's somebody that comes up, no, talk to Tony why this thing isn't happening, all those people just need to be removed immediately. The whole culture has to be so on point that people like that wouldn't even dare to show up. And you need to have also different layers of defense, like second, third, fourth, which can account for these types of anomalies happening from time to time. And yet they're caught in a trap when they do, because they thought it was just going to be this easy, but then it tripped off a wire someplace else, and different people came in that they weren't expecting, and they all get blasted out. So no, legislation billing hours for legal counsel, all of that, hell no, that's a racket. All needs to go. Another rather absurd occurrence in our postmodern times is these weakening Western countries that send diplomats to tyrants that are militaristic. And then they think that just by coming up with some type of legal document and agreement that that's a binding thing, when in fact these militaristic barbarians are looking all the time whether or not they can defeat you on some level or in some area. And if they can do that, they're going to try to do that one way or another, and it's just a complete waste of time going through the tedious machinations of coming up with some type of agreement with people that are like that. So if you haven't accurately assessed them to be what they indeed are, what is the point of it? And so we have now this ridiculous focus more on diplomacy at this point, when the military side of things, in other words, the stick side of things, has been eroded. And it's not just the stick itself, it's the logistics behind the stick. It's the arm and the body wielding the stick. If it's an overweight, pudgy person with a limp, it might be a big stick, but they might still think they can take you. And they might be right. Like, if they're lean, mean, and have some new things they can hit you with, then why wouldn't they give it a try? So, what type of time are we living in? It's really rather disappointing in a lot of ways. Strategically, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what happens when your leadership is degraded via political, economic, and social predation. I hope people are not getting tired out with the term neo-Leninist, but it does help to see them in that lens, especially when you go back in history. So realize that 89, when the Berlin Wall fell, and then 91, when they shot up the Duma with a tank. And then also don't forget 89 is when Tiananmen Square happened, and they ran over all of those students with tanks. That the whole neo-communist world was destabilized. So this was a real crisis for the people that had been positioned around the world, for the fifth column outside of the Soviet Union. People who had been wig flipped in the 60s that were still running on the utopianism and the lies that were spread outside of the borders of the Soviet Union and China. So they had to figure something out, and so what it appears to be what they did is, especially their operatives in California, they had then this idea, well, let's pump China's economy. And so then at least one half of the communist world, see again, these ideologues, they're big into hair splitting. There's Leninist, Stalinist, Maoist, Trotskyist. See, there's diversity there. So they said, all right, well, this Trotskyist, Stalinist faction, or let's just say Stalinist faction, failed. So let's put all of our chips into the Maoist faction and then make that look successful. Let's sell that as a success, as an economic success. So if you compare it to how they presented Russia, so Russia, a failed state, right? Look, oh, they're shooting the parliament building. So they had to go with more of a deception, but that also discredited the Stalinist faction. The neo-Leninists like when there's despotic violence used, because that's successful. They like Castro because that's what he did. That's why they like Mao. So so this commandeered like all of what would have otherwise been invested in U.S. and Western Europe industry into China. That's what fueled their rise. And of course, there's an opportunity cost. What did that cause in the U.S.? It caused what they call a Rustbelt, which is similar to the Northern Territories of England, where you had shipbuilding and manufacturing and industrialization. They experienced deindustrialization, which means that companies fell apart, which meant communities fell apart, which means you not only lost the production capacity, but you also lost all of that talent, because production doesn't just stay production. A large part of production is research, development, and then new investment. You break that process, you break that cycle, that's catastrophic for civilized industrial societies. It's also catastrophic for potential military defense. At the same time, you're boosting an adversary. So this is what the Fifth Column did. First off, they whitewashed the Chinese government. Oh, they're not communists anymore. They've adopted capitalism. That was a gigantic lie. Big lie. But it worked on the rubes, worked on the policymakers, and that's what happened. So, and at the same time, what it did is even the Russians were like, well, we're completely wrecked because we adopted capitalism. But look at how well the Chinese are doing. So in a way, it grew credibility for the idea, well, if we had only been more Stalin-esque, like the Maoists were Maoists, then we would be doing as well as they are or better. And so you can see what a catastrophic development that has led, which is simultaneously a significant weakening, if not fatal weakening, of Western civilization, and a fatal strengthening of the bad actors of the world. So, but we still have these operators. The operators are still in the West. You can have this comprehensive understanding of what has happened or is happening, but that these people have not been ejected yet. They haven't been seen or recognized for the bad actors that they are. And so, as things become more and more apparent, people are going to come more and more around to this conclusion. But will it be too late? They're planning on disrupting our political and information processes as much as they can, from outside and from inside. And they're, I would say, more active now on the inside and have been the whole time. The outside is when they feel like the inside can't resist the outside type of situation. Then they'll just push externally against a rotting opponent that can't bring enough thunder to the places that it needs to bring in order to prevail. But again, if you think you're still in a state of superiority, then you're not assessing the situation properly. That's a precondition of losing a confrontation. So it's not like they're going to try to change these perception differentials to be accurate. So it's an unprecedented time, unprecedented hostility, unprecedented exploitation of pre-positioned assets, and pre-positioned networked misinformation. And this is the cumulative effects that we witness in contemporary socioeconomic political conditions. Will it turn around? We don't know. It's hard to say at this point. But as far as reassessing what we should tolerate and who and why and where, those are always relevant questions to ask, especially in light, not just in the historical circumstances, but also at this present time. And certainly the disadvantages that we all experience based on these bad actors. A comparison that came to me was what we're seeing, for example, in Donetsk. So is sort of comparable to what happened in the Rustbelt of the United States. The only difference was it was done without direct military means. So sort of, you could consider it like an undeclared war, and also using economic levers more. But certainly the results are pretty similar, at least on a socioeconomic and political level. It's just done by a lot of gray zone actors, a lot more crime. But I wonder what the crime rates are in Donetsk at this time. But if you think that, like, also they have crony sheriffs and stuff there, and what a crony sheriff can get into, and how his cronyism sort of works on a day-to-day basis, it's similar. So as far as the history books go, you could make this correlation in processes as one of the results of you could call it like a conic incursion. Because we're it's funny because Star Trek again, Klingons, they sort of wanted to make the Russians there was sort of a vague connection to the Russians. Of course the Federation or whatever was fighting against the Klingons. Klingons were a lot worse in the first episodes. But it's funny, Klingon and then the conification, like the conic state, the Khans, the Crimean Khanate, the Muscovy Khanate, the Klingons, Khanate. So make that connection. Klingons amongst us. And then it was funny, the later versions, like with Jean-Luc Picard, they had a Klingon on the bridge, so the beef with the Klingons was over. We were working together. They humanized Worf and made him part of the team, despite his Klingonian attributes. But that was just a smoke show. Imagine that there's an alternative story where Worf is indeed working against the Enterprise. He's just pretending to be, his lovable alien self. Wouldn't that be disturbing, like a disturbing parallel narrative? Because that's closer to the truth. And so, don't just think on national levels, think on regional levels, because there's been a penetration of security, and it shows on a macro scale. It's hard, and it also shows in the fine details, but it's just that disconnect from reality in the information sphere that keeps a lot of people from putting two and two together. But from a historical perspective, that's probably how the history is going to be categorized in a future world. Once the people, the Blarney machines get turned off, that's how it's going to probably be described as by scientists that investigate war crimes and things of that nature. Yeah, take the Star Trek view again. You're flying over a planet, you're orbiting a planet, and you're looking at the Rust Belt below, and then you're like, okay, we've seen this type of attack before on a different planet. Like the computer is able to identify it. Then it puts together the actors, connects the dots to politics maybe, appointees, and people who appoint appointees. And then it's funny, yeah, this string of cities and villages, this river basin, they spread up this way and that way. They took out this city, then that city. And this is how they're living now, with no industry to speak of, because they killed it off. But there are like major land holdings there that connect to the original head chopping operation. Something like that. Wouldn't that be cool? Like a modern Star Trek version with that parallel twist in the plot. There I am flying over a Rust Belt, not my Rust Belt, a Rust Belt. That's something you should also realize. Donuts was very industrialized. In fact, there was a very important English industrialist who identified some type of coal deposit there, and he realized that was a great spot for steel production. And then just think of the great pool of resources in human labor that he had in that area in the 19th century, like farming communities and their hardworking, moral citizenry. And Azov Steel, there you go. And then, of course, Russian investments, subsequent Russian investments. And now look at it, a war-torn zombie land with again, special type of mandarins that like being closer to the action with a different set of perks that don't lead to economic recovery or law and order. At least not your version of it. More of a like Mongolian version. Or a Khanate version of Mandarinism and justice. Or the lack thereof. Why we should all have more compassion for ourselves and others. Especially people that have experienced modernity. Let's not forget that television is a relatively new invention in civilizational terms. They did not have TV in Babylon. They did not have TV in Athens. They did not have TV in other times. It seems so obvious to say that, and yet that realization is rather ponderous, because a lot of our lives have been spent in telescopic places, which is to say TV shows, entertainment, as we call it, but it's sort of a label that can go on a lot of things. So just like watching sports via television is not doing sports, right? That's a common criticism. But I think the biggest danger is just getting sucked into drama and agitation, and also big problems in big places all around the world all the time. This is the mental stamina is not enough to take that all in and day out, because we keep getting notices from now the TVs have jumped from the entertainment console in the living room right into your pocket. Imagine that. Like when you turned the TV off in what, the 80s, that TV did not follow you around all day. You might have came back to it, but you might also not come back to it because it was a big inanimate, immovable object in a specific place for the purpose of watching it. The phone, not so much. People can be sitting at a red light and be looking at their phone. And now it's not just passive entertainment like watching the Beverly Hillbillies. It's about communicating, so not just trivial communication, although that's a big part of it too, but not so trivial communication like there's a text, I'm at Terminal 3. I know I sent you Terminal 5, but it's 3 and I don't know where I am, and can you come and get me? That text getting through to the right person at the right time and that person paying attention means a completely different outcome. Whereas before, that was just impossible. You had no cell phones, no way to communicate, no way to coordinate, no way to find yourself around. How about that they have navigation now? GPS, what a miracle. What a miracle. That's all I can say. The time before GPS, quite challenging. I've traveled thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of miles without GPS. That's why I like it so much. And yet, there's downsides to that. There were some unforeseen aspects of that were also not really taken into the equation. And yet, even these bad things can sometimes be overestimated because we lose distance from telescopic problems because we're not built as a living creature to do that. We're not. We're on the same level as many other animals, and we shouldn't have higher expectations than that. It's perfectly okay that a lion is a lion. A man is a man. A woman is a woman. There's a lot of causality tied up in all of those things, including how we're treated in life, what we do, why, what we concern ourselves with and what we don't. And all of that is perfectly okay. For God's sakes, have compassion on yourself and others. The good news is even the hardest hearted person can find a way to drip through boulders and strata of earth. That compassion is a really, really good thing. And you should think of it as a skill, not as a weakness, not as something soft. What it is congruent. And sometimes this congruency should start in a counterintuitive place, which is you would assume you would have compassion for yourself, but you don't. Towards others, and not just others, even the smallest of living creatures. That can kickstart the process of realization that actually no, people punish themselves when they shouldn't. And they do it without realizing it. Because it's automatic and they are deceived. Deception is also part of it, which is to say delusion. They see it this way, and that's why they're not compassionate. And that way is just one of a myriad numbers of ways of seeing things that one could say is the wrong way of seeing things, because ipso facto, if it's creating agitation and irritation and suffering and distress and melancholy or depression or anything else like that, it's wrong. It is. Just simplify things. Always simplify things. Complexity is part of delusion. It's too complex, I can't see it. We'll simplify it. What is the net result of seeing things in a particular way? That is just one of many ways. And then think of yourself, what is the skillfulness or unskillfulness of picking that one way that is the worst way? Like you filter out the worst critic and then that's the one you consider to be skillful. But it is skillful, but skillful in causing suffering and harm. But is that skillful when it's not? And so that's when you can get into these satori moments where you can then detach and say, wow, wait a second, if this is optional, and it is optional, I see a yellow house, I see a red house, I see a blue house. Then why would you pick something that is agitating when you don't have to? And that's not losing your grip, or in a way it is losing your grip, but you're losing a grip on something that doesn't matter anyway to anyone but you, whether or not you're tearing yourself a new one or not. Why do that? Whatever it is, like look at it, let it go. Comes back, let it go again. Till you get into the habit of it, and then guess what? It doesn't come back. It's like I get in the habit of taking a shower at inappropriate intervals, and therefore I have very limited skin irritation and other things that would otherwise be a new normal for me if I were to neglect physical hygiene. And yet we do that and do not see that there is a spiritual equivalent to that practice, which is mental hygiene. What's giving yourself the time to decompress, looking at what's there and dropping anything that's causing you agita, causing you fear, causing you any type of the defilements, anxiety. Is this thinking about the future? Well, that's delusional. You see the horrible future. Why not see the miraculous future instead? It's possible. It's possible in the moment that you see it. And you can, if you look.